In this video, we're talking about composing the foreground of a painting. And of course, you have to compose a whole painting, but generally the foreground is what carries you into the focal point, center of interest. Sometimes you can have your center of interest in the foreground, but generally, first few inches of the painting, you want to design it in such a way that it leads the viewers into the focal point or center of interest, or whatever it is you want the viewer to look at. I mean, suppose that's why we're painting, because we have something we want viewers to see in the painting, so design it so that foreground takes you into it. This is a landscape from Montana near the national park, little town close to there. And the first thing I always want to do, whether I'm outside or inside, is to crop the painting. In other words, I want to zoom in, see how far I can zoom in, and just paint what's the most important part. In other words, I'm eliminating a lot of stuff that doesn't matter. And in this photograph, you can see there's so much foreground, so much sky. My focal point is right in here. So I want to zoom in quite a bit. So I've cropped it already, and I will generally crop it, 4 or 5 different ways, see how many different compositions I can get. If you have a good photograph, you should be able to get 3 or 4 different paintings out of it, which is always good. You want to get quite a few paintings out of each photograph if you can. And even if they're not any good, you at least go through the exercise of composing, cropping, zeroing in, and making good compositions out of different areas of the photograph. So it's always a good exercise whether there's really that many good paintings in a photograph or not. But what I did here, the foreground here is actually pretty nice. It could even be the center of interest, although I think the barn and the house, and then a secondary center of interest in the trees and the mountains. A lot going on in the foreground, a lot that I like. I like the color variety. It's a lot of different colors in here from the greens. Several different greens, reds, oranges, red, violet, violet. This grass in here is a pretty strong violet, even though some people would look at it and say gray. You always want to think in terms of colors on the color wheel. So I look at this and I see violet. Might be a muted violet, but it is violet nonetheless. Things I don't like are the lines in the foreground. It's got a horizontal line here that just kind of runs off, fairly horizontal. You got a line here and another line here. They're all horizontal. Now the bushes do break them up, and that works nicely, but there's too much horizontal. What I want to do is force these different colors and shapes and pull them into the focal point. The more you can get away from the photograph, the better. Even though I've already cropped it, the more I can think outside the box of what the photograph gives me, I think the better the painting is going to be. So I try and pull the colors I see in there. The violets, I want to pull it towards the house. Same thing with these oranges, but I would want it, in other words, that perspective of as things recede back, they get thinner. And as they come towards you, they get wider. I want to make sure I keep all that wider. I'd break it up more with darks and some greens, but everything kind of pulls you back into the center of interest here. So I'd probably break up these violets here with some greens, but still it's going to pull your eye back in there. I do have some horizontal brush strokes or areas or shapes in here in the greens, and using the contrast of the colors, the different values of the colors. Now all these colors that I've used on the computer here are too bright, but I wanted to really have them stand out. And I'll often do this to a photograph before I paint, so I'll have 2 images on the screen, one where I make these changes, whether it's in the foreground or background or wherever, and the other one of just the cropped image that I want to paint from. Now a couple of other images. This one's in the Teton Mountains, late in the afternoon, so it's backlit. So all these vertical shapes, the shrubbery, the bushes, they're all vertical and they're all dark because of the backlighting. Just like the mountains, they're dark, they're upright, and they're dark. So everything upright, the fence, the horses, the trees, because the light is in front, everything vertical is going to be in the dark. And that really helps me separate the planes and the values in the foreground. And they may not look real dark, or they may not stand up very much at all, but I want to force everything either into the light or into the dark. And that helps me simplify and create more of a pattern. So I'll take the darks, the uprights here, and I created a pattern going this way, and it winds and leads the eye back, into here, into the horses. Same thing if I go this way or that way. I don't have a literal connection, but the viewer's eye makes the jump. So I'm using those lines, those dark lines, to pull the eye back. Now when I don't have that, before I made those changes, what I have is, again, more horizontal lines. And they can just chop up the painting. Instead of pulling me into the painting this way, they just break up the painting horizontally. Sometimes it's not a big deal. I mean, that still progressively gets smaller, and that kind of winds your eye around. But if I can pull those darks together a bit more and emphasize that direction, and then simplifying the lights also. Again, these are too strong, these colors in here, and some of the darks, especially as they get back to about here, they're too dark. This is also in the Tetons. And I like the foreground here also. Again, it has nice shapes, these darker shrubbery, and then the lighter wildflowers. It makes for nice contrast. And it also makes for nice alleyways or pathways to lead you back into the painting. So I can take some of this yellow and create maybe a bigger swath of it and lead you back in here. Or I can take the darks, the dark shrubbery here, and pull them together to kind of lead you forward or backward. But this is what I did. I did both. I pulled some of the lights together, and you can see how the eye can kind of follow from several different places. But direct paths, I'll probably pick up a bit more light here, that leads you back to whatever the center of interest might be. Same thing with the dark shrubbery, back in here, and just pulling you forward. Several different areas. And it just leads back to the center. Don't want to over design and make it so obvious, but use these shapes, these values, to really pull you back into the focal point. And again, these values are too strong. Color's not too strong probably, but too much contrast. The foreground is now the center of interest, and sometimes it can be. This did have a lot of wildflowers. I've added some violet wildflowers, and that can be a focal point too. You can work with the foreground. Generally, the foreground leads you back into the background. This one, the foreground is the center of interest. And I've done a couple of things here. I just simplified the values. When you have a subject that's this busy, it's not chamisa, it's some kind of sage shrub of some kind. Very busy, a lot of little lines, darks and lights in there, and it makes it hard to read, hard to simplify. But if I can reduce everything to 3 values, or one of 3 values, and then separate the planes a bit more, then it's always easier to work with, no matter how detailed I want it. So I have the 3 values, the dark, halftone, the light. Then I have the flat ground. I just introduced some flat ground. I wanted to separate these values a bit more. Now this is minus the brushwork or detail or anything else that might be in it, but it is simplified a bit more, and it's easier to block in when I can think of it this way first.